Welcome back to another edition of Just One Question. I am honored and really pleased to have my good friend Nick Craig with us this time. Nick is the author of Leading from Purpose, which is a book that I read and it changed my life. So I will go on record as giving that a five-star review right here and now. He's the president of the Core Leadership Institute, and he and his co-workers have worked on the issues of purpose and authenticity with over 20,000 business people over the last decade. So welcome, Nick Craig. I just want to check in with you and see how you're doing.
Thank you, Nick. How am I doing? How do you answer that question these days is a really, in itself becomes complicated. Fundamentally, I think I'm doing well. I find that some of the stuff we've been up to is actually doing well in this ecosystem right this minute. And I have friends and colleagues who've been laid off, some people who've gotten sick. All of them have gotten well, but they all had a moment where they had to say, well, what would happen if I didn't? So I've had very profound conversations with people about those experiences. So it's been it's all over the place, I guess, is the best way to answer it.
Yeah, I know that feeling. It is that way for many of us. Yeah, my mother has the coronavirus. She's symptom-free, but at 91, we're wow, checking in with her on a daily basis. So it's all over the place. I hear you. America and the rest of the world is slowly and haltingly going back to work. We're opening back up the spigots of commerce, and it's different in each of the 50 states, and even in municipalities and counties within the states. So it's a real patchwork thing. We're all curious to know what it's going to be like a year from now after these things have sorted themselves out and we're back to work in some way. And so I'm asking folks like you, what do you think the world's going to look like a year from now? Are we going to be the same? Are we going to be different? Of course, we'll be different, but how much? So just throw your keen mind onto that problem, Nick, and give us your take.
Well, I've had the opportunity to talk to some really interesting people about that conversation, from the CEO of Ben & Jerry's to number 2 at Home Depot to the guy who runs behavioral science at West Point, to a number of different people. We've been having this conversation. If I look at 6 months from now versus a year from now, I get a different story. I do think that the possibility of a vaccine showing up is actually fairly high. I have some colleagues that are working on some different versions, and they really feel good about the possibility. At the same time, I think that we live in a time right now that's equivalent to the generation that went through World War II. It's a global, turbulent experience that we're all having. And there's no way that World War II could have not changed the way the world is. All the rules of the way the world was before, many of them are not going to make it to the new world. The world on the other side is going to look different. And mainly because of this pause that we're in, actually allows us to reevaluate what is it that of the world we lived in really did work and what didn't. And I think many leaders that I know are really looking to say, listen, I really think there's a different way we need to be able to operate. The big upside is I think there's going to be a greater level of humanity and humanness that's going to happen. Now, this sounds funny, but this is a conversation that people have been saying to me. What I mean by this is that we are all more vulnerable. And in some ways, because of that, we're all much more transparent. You and I have had conversations I don't think we've ever had that we have very quickly now. Mm-hmm. And I think people are having these conversations, and they're having it in the workplace. And I think it's actually going to make it a more human place, and people are going to be less willing to tolerate the unkindness that we had on the front end. And I think people are going to be wanting and hunger for those organizations that are willing to bring that to be. But they're all not going to be in the office anymore. So I think it's going to be, how do you actually what does it mean to be in an organization where you don't go to an office? And so the intangibles will become the key.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Your stories, your whole concept of stories,
Mm-hmm.
that the future will be owned not by those who have a story, but the future will be owned by those who are the story writers.
Mm.
They're writing the story of where we can now go instead of the story of the history of how we got to where we are and the opportunity to do that. So what are the future Steve Jobses? I think there's going to be a lot of them showing up, and they're all going to see things that some of us can't see. And then we're all going to say, gosh, why? It was obvious. Why did I? But because all the old stuff got broke away, there's this wonderful gap that we're now sitting in where I think the level of creativity it will seem like there's all this creativity that we haven't seen before.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think I'm on drugs, but this is what I think.
I love it. Nick Craig, everybody. When he speaks, you need to listen. So thank you for that, Nick. I love the optimism that's buried in there, and I love the insights. Thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, man.